Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Eternal Deck History series. In this series I talk about the history of a specific archetype in detail, in this case about Stonescar Syl. The main basis for that will be my archive of Throne Tournament decklists. I will try to fill in the gaps with what I can find on YouTube, Discord, Eternal Warcry and Reddit. But you have to keep in mind that I wasn't around for all of Eternal's history and that it can be tough to find detailed information on how a deck developed between tournaments. All deck history videos will follow the same general structure, which you can see here. Firstly, I will shortly talk about the defining features of the deck, the parts that stayed constant throughout all of the deck's history. After that, I will go through the history of the deck in chronological order, divided into core phases, 5 in the case of Stonescar Syl. I will show example deck lists from those phases and talk about card choices and general developments and the reasons behind them. At the end, I include a modern version of the archetype, either from someone else or made by myself, and shortly talk about it. You can find all the deck lists, including that modern version, and all other important sources I used for each video, including a thanks to everyone who helped me with questions or the modern deck lists, in the description below. With that said, let's dive into today's archetype, Stonescar Syl. Stonescar Syl was a mid-range deck that, contrary to most Stonescar Arco decks, focused on shadow instead of fire influence. The deck came into existence with the release of its namesake card, Syl Cabal Strongarm, in set 9 Argent Depths in June 2020. And while it went through some pretty significant changes in the 2.5 years up until the end of official competitive play, it always had a consistent core. That core included 2 older cards, Champion of Chaos and Tasbu the Forbidden, who used to be a 6/6. But the rest of the core cards, namely the aforementioned Syl, Shadow Etchings and Exploit, were all released in 2020. The core cards show the general idea of the deck, a mix of aggressively statted early game units like Syl or Champion of Chaos that allowed for high tempo plays early on, and value engines like Tasbu and to some degree Syl 2 that made it possible to outgrind other midrange or control decks. Another important way to generate value for almost all versions of the deck was to repeatedly use fate effects with market access cards. The best targets for that were Cruel and, before he got nerfed in January 2022, Xo, who used to cost 8 and draw Treasure Trove on Fate instead of having Inscribe in its current summon effect. The deck had a total of 28 throne tops, more than half of which came from ICQ Hour of Class in September 2021, which was also won by Silska, piloted by IronMan. But from the release of Syl in June 2020 to that ICQ in September 2021, the deck barely existed in competitive play, only reaching 2 top 64s. As the name of the first phase says, Silska got overshadowed by the other, more powerful cards and decks that were made in the wake of Set 9's release. At the start, Rakano Influence and even seen in midrange, and after the release of the Awakening campaign in September 2020, Horokira and the Legion spells. Nonetheless, some people already tried to make Silska work in 2020. The first list I could find on Eternal Warcry, which you can see on screen now, was posted by Dead Resolves in August 2020. It already included the core cards that got released up until that point, so Syl, Champion, Tasbu and Etchings, and it already follows the general idea of later tournament lists. That idea was to have a consistent curve of proactive cards from turn 2 to turn 5 or 6. I remember that Ikaria used to cost 6 at that point, with some cheap removal options that you could play next to your proactive threats if necessary. And the goal was to either out-tempo your opponent with proactive plays or to outgrind them with 2-for-1s, like Ikaria or Check, or with repeatable value engines like Syl or Tasbu. The list was still missing proactive plays on turn 2 though, except for the rare hands in which you could play Syl on turn 2, but it received new options with the release of the Awakening campaign in September and the release of Set 10 Empire of Glass in November of 2020. This list, posted by Iliak in December 2020, included those new options, namely Akanta, Ascending and Exploit. Akanta was another payoff for high shadow influence. While she wasn't the greatest tempo play on turn 2, she could meet her first influence threshold on turn 3 with symbols, and her other effects meant that she, like Syl, was a cheap unit that was both playable early and still threatening later on. Exploit was also not a great tempo play on turn 2, and it didn't necessarily provide 2-for-1s, but it made the power base even more consistent thanks to blunder, and it could deal with problematic cards like relics, combo pieces, or blowout cards like Equalize or Shenra Speaks. Ilya also added the aforementioned fate value options, Xo in the market and Cruel in the Xo in the main deck and Cruel in the market, which could be used repeatedly with Smuggler and Etchings to generate extra value. With those new additions, the deck finally managed to top its first tournament, reaching top 64 at ICQ Stonebreaks in the hand of Pogdi. It's just similar to Ilya's, but instead of Xo and Cruel, it tries to generate value with Aramod's repeatable ability and the newly released 2-for-1 discard spell D'Angelo Arson. But even with all those new cards and nerfs to other decks, Sealscar was overshadowed in that ICQ in March 2021 by decks like Even Fell Midrange, the better Akanta and Icaria deck, and by FPS Sacrifice, the better Cruel deck. And in the ICQ Revelations 3 months later, it got overshadowed again by decks like Skycrack Sling, Skycrack Aggro, and Horo Kira. That changed after a huge balance patch on September 2nd, 2021. With that patch, Direwolf wanted to shake up the Throne meta and hit decks and cards that had been relevant for a long time, which included nerfs to Horo Kira, Skycrack Sling, Skycrack Aggro, and Harley Combo, among others. It also included 2 nerfs that affected Stonescar Syl directly. Cruel's revived units would now come into play exhausted, and D'Angelo Might's cost was changed from 5 to 6. But both of those cards remained playable, so Sealscar was a lot better off than pretty much any other relevant deck. That suddenly made it the deck to beat for the upcoming Hour of Glass ICQ, and it delivered. It was the most well-represented deck, taking up 17 of the top 64 spots, and it won the tournament in the hands of IronMan, whose list you can see on screen now. As you can see in that list, it still has the same core cards as Ilya's list from 9 months prior. It only replaced Icaria with Pale Rider's Timepiece, which offered a similar effect, killing any unit while giving you a big threat, but it also had lifesteal to stabilize against more aggressive decks, or to raise other midrange decks. And of course, Icaria was nerfed to 7 power, so Timepiece was the more efficient option anyway. And it also replaced Defile with Voprex's Choice, which was buffed from slow to fast in the September 2nd patch. Overall, the deck was perfectly equipped to thrive in an open, uncertain meta, which was caused by the patch only 8 days before the ICQ started, because the deck had both a strong proactive gameplay and efficient reactive options that were flexible enough to beat aggro, midrange control, and thanks to exploit even combo, proven by IronMan's win against almost Kilo Stranger combo list in the final. All the 17 lists in that ICQ had a very similar core, but I still want to show off the 2 other well-represented versions. First up, we have the Team Barbarian Camp version, which had its best finish in the hand of Avione, who reached top 4 before losing to almost Kilo list. The main deck is almost exactly the same as IronMan's, but the market differs a bit more, with Boar instead of Strange Burglar to have an answer for problematic relics, and Icaria instead of Thesos Office, which both fill a similar role, like a late game card that could kill a unit and still leave something good on the board. The other variation I want to show off was from Team Invoked Lethal. Here you can see Killer King's top 32 list. They decided to play a more proactive early game lineup with Torch instead of Sinister Rumors and Vinecrafter instead of Timepiece. And they also went for cheaper removal in the market instead of Designs, which got worse with Vinecrafter's additional 2-drop because it meant that you had a higher likelihood of killing your own 2-drops. And instead of expensive removal like Icaria or Office, because Vinecrafter already demanded additional power to get to the market, which made too many expensive cards, especially expensive reactive cards, a bit risky. So instead they played cheap removal like Combust or Edict of Makar. The success of Stonescar Syl in that ICQ led to 2 nerfs swiftly after. Tasbu was nerfed from 6-6 to 6-4, and Senway's Smuggler was nerfed from 3-2 to 2-2, which was, coupled with the strong cards that other decks received in the following releases, Z12 Cold Hunt and the mini-set The Valley Beyond, enough to keep the deck from seeing any play at the LCQ Invitational and the World Championship Finals of 2021. The 3 months break following that season saw the release of another big set, Unleashed, and additional balance changes, most importantly for Stonescar, the nerf that removed Xo from competitive playability because it removed his fade effect, which meant that Stonescar Syl had to reinvent itself at the start of the 2022 season. The core remained, as you can see in De facto's top 120 list from ICQ Shafka Reborn in May 2022, but without the value of market shuffling Xo, and with a weaker Taspu, who was still played in some, but not all lists, like this list, the deck got a lot more aggressive. The 4 lists atop the May 2022 ICQ only played 8 2-drops, but they all cut the 5+ cost cards like Xo or Pale Rider's Timepiece completely and replaced them with more aggressive plays on turn 3 or 4. Like the new Syl, who used to be a 1-3 with double damage, and Check. The faster speed and the fact that Check needed free fire influence meant that the power base had to be adjusted as well. Instead of the usual 16 or 17 duels plus 4 shadow symbols plus 4 or 5 shadow sigils that almost all 2021 lists played, people experimented with cutting shadow symbols for more duels instead, which made both Syl and Akanta worse, which led to most lists cutting Akanta later off, which got cut in 3 of the 4 turboing lists. Only 4 lists in top 120, none of them winning their first match, was already a bad start in the 2022 season, but it got even worse with the release of the Enter the Arcanum campaign, specifically the release of the Creation Project, which only cost free power on release. The ICQ arrived after it was released. ICQ, a risky investment, was completely dominated by FTJ Acro decks built around Creation Project. Other decks had a tough time keeping up with the immense tempo and value that Project provided for just free power, but it was especially difficult for Stonescar Syl because it didn't have the strong relic removal options that Xenon had. Mail tried to play it nonetheless by taking the old core from 2021 and adapting it to a meta full of Creation Project decks with cards like Siegebreaker and Smuggler for Market Boar. He also added some tech cards for the popular Xenon Katra decks, with Eavesdrop and a market copy of Toll of Warfare, and some tech cards for Acro, with Twisted Farmer and the return of a market copy of Aramod's designs. But even with all those tech choices and the return of value options like Taspo and Market D'Angelo Might, the deck just couldn't keep up, with Mail as the only player to reach day 2 with it in that tournament. At the last Throne ICQ of 2022, Stonescar Syl was a bit more successful again, with 4 day 2 spots, including a top 16 from Cormdog. After nerfs to Project, the deck didn't need quite as many anti-relicate cards, which made room for cards like Syl's Stronghold, a card that could remove problematic units with victimless crime, enhance your board pressure, and help outgrind opponents if you could protect it. All 4 lists still kept the more value-oriented approach of 2021 versions, with 4 Taspu and usually also 4 Xo Conqueror of Stonescar, who acted as a newer version of Icarian Timepiece, which means an expensive threat that could also remove problematic units, with the upside of being repeatable, but the downside of not having an immediate effect. Another new inclusion was Rania, released as a promo in late 2022. She was another unit that you could just play as a proactive play on curve, but she could also be used for big value and tempo swings thanks to a strong contract ability. With the less aggressive approach, Check got cut again, which brought symbols back. Despite that, Akanta remained cut from most lists in favor of Vinecrafter, was a lot less fragile in the early game because of Region, which helped a lot against Acro, while still being good later thanks to his ability to access the market. Now we come to the current day list. When I started working on the modern version of the historic archetype, I was a little bit annoyed by how few good cards the archetype seemed to have gotten since late 2022, but after working on it a bit I still found a list I'm very happy with. I decided to cut Akanta and symbols, like some of the 2022 lists did, because I really wanted to play Check. His summon effect is very strong against aggro and unit-based midrange decks with smaller units, which includes a lot of the decks I regularly see on ladder right now, like FTJ Project, Stonescar Aggro, Praxis Recruit or Horekira. He also has very strong synergy with Market Cruel. If you have a check in your void, you can get Cruel from the market, revive check as long as you have 3 power, of course, and discard Cruel for his effect and still have 2 power up, which you could use to play a draw from check or any other 2-cost card. If the check in void already had double damage, you don't even need to discard a sigil, you can just discard Cruel or anything else, and he will still deal 4 damage because he keeps the double damage in void. With 20 duels and the option with 20 duels, check will consistently be live on turn 4, and between Syl, Etchings, Rista and Exploit, you will usually have a sigil for him. Without Akanta and the option to play Syl on turn 2, because I'm not playing symbols anymore, I also wanted another 2-drop next to Vinecrafter, and after some testing and deliberation with folks on Discord, I went with Murgo. His hunt effect can give you Plunder, Discard or Market Fodder, and remove face eaches for cards like Exploit, Check or Silverblade Menace, and his ultimate ability can help against control decks, because those usually have a problem with big relic weapons. And you also have good targets that you can transform in your void. For example, you can transform Syl to get a 2 power 5/1 relic weapon. I went with the cheapest removal possible, Contract and Torch, to make the early game as smooth as possible, and to keep aggro, in especially turn 1 Dasher, in check. The last flex spot in the removal lineup is Hidden Garret, which is decent against aggro in midrange, as just like a 2-cost deal 3 damage removal, but it shines especially against control decks because it can deal damage early and help push through Exploit and help push through face eaches to get Exploit and burn damage through. Most importantly, it allows you to play your potential win condition against control Silverblade Menace. Because Cruel for powerful cheap units like Syl or Check is one of the biggest strengths of the deck, I decided to play 12 instead of the usual 8 market access cards. So in addition to Vinecraft and Etchings, I also play Shadow Delivery, which was released in set 14, so after the last tournaments. It's usually a little bit awkward in unit-based mid-range because you pay 2 and don't affect the board. But with the option to get Cruel with it, revive a unit for free, you can affect the board, so it's a lot better here. Especially because this deck has a lot of cheap units like Syl or Check that you can bring back early for a lot of board impact. Outside of Cruel and Menace, the market contains Rania, which helps you stabilize against aggro and outtempo midrange decks. Syl's Stronghold, the card you either pick when you just want a strong proactive play early on, or when you need efficient removal for a non-hero unit. And Pale Rider's Timepiece, which is another way to stabilize and or to put on pressure with a big flying threat. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this list. I had a lot of success on ladder. And I know that Lightsoutace, for example, also had a lot of success on ladder with it. I think he went on a 20-game win streak. So this is by far the best modern deck history decklist so far. I wouldn't say it's the best deck or like even a top 3 deck on the ladder, but it's definitely a deck you can easily get to master with. This marks the end of the 3rd episode of the Eternal Deck History series. You can find all sources and decklists, including that modern decklist, in the video description. And if you haven't already, you can check out the other deck history and Eternal Top 10 episodes on my channel. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a nice rest of the weekend.